I did not, I wish that I could tell you that I'd had a lifelong burning ambition to go to law school, but that's not true. I grew up in a time where women were secretaries, teachers, and nurses, or they got married and had a family. And those were the options that I viewed as available to me when I was growing up. And I started at KU in 1968, and at that time, all of the young women at KU were wearing pleated skirts and matched sweater sets and knee socks, and they were all studying to become teachers or nurses, or they were just studying art history and English, so they were there to get a husband. But while I was at KU, there was just a sea change of attitudes about women's roles. And by the time I graduated, I knew that I was going to want to do more than what I had originally thought was open to me. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a teacher or a nurse or an administrative assistant. Those are all very important work. It's all important work, and it's all very honorable, but I wanted something different, and all of a sudden I saw that there was a chance of doing something different. And I did continue on at KU for 2 years. I finished my master's. Still, actually, I had planned to become a high school teacher when I started college. I finished my master's and was started with the work for the PhD. I had raised my sights to becoming a college professor instead of a high school teacher. And then I decided to go to law school. And so I abandoned the idea of becoming a professor and went to law school instead. I was dating a guy at the time who was in law school, and he continually told me that it was fortunate that I was just studying for my PhD in Spanish because law school was just too difficult for a woman. And so I applied to law school. And he found out about it and said, if you go to law school, it's the end of our relationship. And I said, okay, goodbye, and went to law school. The first year of law school was difficult for me because I had been accustomed to an entirely different kind of academic discipline. I don't think it was because I was a woman. I did not feel that the professors in law school treated the women differently. I thought they were very fair to us. It's full of people, all of whom are used to being the very top of their class and everything else. And so, egos get bruised. You have to learn that. Ours was the second class that had a significant number of women in it, I think. Before then, there had been just a handful of women in each class, and they were a handful of wonderful women like Mary Beck Briscoe and Danelle Taha, but there were just a few of them. And our class had, I think, 20%, and the class that immediately preceded us also had about 20%. So we were the first group that had significant numbers of women. I think the most exciting thing about being in law school was just the feeling that we were doing something new and different, that we were the first wave of women to try this. That was very exciting. Well, we were very aware that we were doing something new. And it was at the same time very exciting and exhilarating and also terrifying because we didn't know how our stories were going to end. We had no clue about whether or not we would be able to be accepted in this profession. We didn't know how we would succeed in the profession. We didn't know what effect it would have on our ability to create a family. We we didn't know how to dress. We didn't know what kind of clothes to put on. All of these, every single thing in our lives required a thoughtful decision. Everything required us to think through it and try to imagine what we should be doing. We didn't have role models, or very few role models. Graduation day I actually have a very vivid memory of that because it was very important to me, and I wanted my parents to come up and be there for graduation. I had worked very hard to get through law school, not just in terms of studying, but also in, I was holding down part-time jobs to get myself through. It was a struggle, and I wanted my parents to be there to share it. And they did come up, and they came to the hooding ceremony, but they decided they didn't want to stay for the graduation, and so they went on home. And I remember walking back up the hill after the graduation ceremony, and it just hit me, wow, I'm really in this by myself. They're not really supporting me in this. This wasn't their idea for me, and it wasn't. They did not encourage me to go to law school. They didn't want me to do it. I found out my mom, one of the things I did to get myself through law school was I continued to teach in the Spanish department as a assistant instructor. They would give me the 6 o'clock classes or 7 o'clock classes because nobody else wanted to get up and do those. So about half of the time that I was in law school, I was also teaching the elementary Spanish courses there at KU. And I was visiting one weekend with a woman that I knew when I went back home for a visit, and she said, "Oh, your mom says you're still teaching." And I said, "Yes, but did she tell you I'm also in law school?" And she said, "Oh no, she didn't mention that. She just said you were teaching." So I think that they were I think that they thought it was foolishness on my part. I think they did not. They never took me seriously. I think that, or at least then they didn't take me seriously. They just didn't encourage it at all. And I will tell you though, when I became a judge, I called to tell my mom and dad that I'd been appointed. And Mom congratulated me. She was very excited for me. And she said, "Let me put your dad on the phone." And I told Daddy, and he said, "Well, I'm really proud of you." And I said, "Dad, that's the first time you've ever said I'm proud of you to me." And he said, "Well, you never became a judge before." So they did eventually accept that I was serious about it, and they were proud of me, but it took them a while. It was difficult. Back then, law firms were really not hiring a lot of women. Some of the larger firms would hire 1 or 2 women and say, "There, we've got a woman on staff, so don't send us any more resumes." So it was challenging, and I did not find a job until after I'd taken the bar exam. So I didn't find a job right away. Okay. And my first job was with Judge Joe Swinehart on the Kansas Court of Appeals, and he hired me to be his research attorney, and I loved that job, and really felt good about doing the work. I felt good about the quality of the work that I did. Really enjoyed that whole experience very much. When I was thinking about applying to become a judge, I talked to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, that you should do this. That would be a wonderful job for you to do." And he came to my swearing-in ceremony, and he put my robe on for me. That was a very nice moment. I was just very thrilled about becoming a judge. I had enjoyed being a lawyer. I had enjoyed doing trial work very much. I really enjoyed practicing law. But I felt when I became a judge that I was stepping into a very much of a higher level of commitment to justice. And it really felt in some ways like, probably like taking orders does to someone in a religious community. You know, I felt like I was making a big commitment to justice, and that felt very good. It felt very good.
It's for you.
You know, nothing about being a lawyer really prepares you for being a judge. They are two really different jobs. I was very fortunate that I came onto the bench in a district where there were 13 other judges, and my colleagues were very, very willing and able to help me make that transition. They always had an open door. If I had a question, I could go talk to any of them. They were very, very helpful to me in making that transition. The attorneys treated me with respect, and my colleagues treated me with respect. I think there was not overt discrimination. I think, though, that like for most women that started practicing back then, there was an underlying assumption of less competence than men enjoyed. And that was a constant battle for all of us, not just for me, for all of us, that, you know, we had to overcome that assumption that we were not as competent as our male counterparts in order to be fully accepted. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened to me early on in my career as a trial attorney here. I was working for Dennis Moore, and I give him much credit for hiring women and promoting women in his office in the early years that we were coming into this profession. And I was trying a case for the DA's office, and I was trying it against an attorney whose name I will not mention, but he was kind of a bluffer and would kind of try cases by the seat of his pants, although he really was an effective trial attorney. And right before the closing argument, they'd gone out to bring the jury in to hear our closing arguments, and he came over to my table, and he was a big guy, and he kind of leaned over and he said, "Russell, it was a mistake to let women practice law. It was a mistake to give women the right to vote." He said, back in the early days when men were roaming the face of the earth in large bands, hunting down animals, women were home in the caves just grubbing worms, and that's what you are, just a little worm grubber. And walked away. And he was, I know that he was just trying to throw me off balance for my closing argument. So I took a deep breath and got up and made my closing argument, and the jury returned a guilty verdict. And he came over and shook my hand and said, "Congratulations." And I leaned over and said, "So how's it feel to be beaten by a little worm grubber?" and you know, after that, he was my buddy. And I think he was on the Judicial Nominating Commission. In fact, when I applied to become a judge, and he was one of the people that I know that supported my nomination. So, you know, have that much contact with attorneys where we'd chat about things like that anymore. So, but I hope that's gone. I don't recall that happening so much in the later years that I was on the bench as it did in the early years. I think it dissipated over time. You know, as they got used to the fact we were here. and probably weren't going to go away. They just decided they'd have to accept us. I feel good about the work that I did. I feel that I did a good job handling cases, that I was fair to people, that I did a conscientious job in working through legal issues and to decide complicated legal issues. I really feel good. I feel that I did a good job. I feel